Sit right down and I'll show you where my dreams began.
I'm Michael Dugan, your culinary host, guiding you through the chef's journey. Join me at the chef's table, where you'll experience stories, secret sauces, signature dishes, and kitchen disasters.
Down and I'll show you where my dreams began.
I'm Michael Dugan, your culinary host, guiding you through the chef's journey. Join me at the chef's table, where you'll experience stories, secret sauces, signature dishes, and kitchen disasters. Today on the show, I want to introduce you to another Seattle chef, originally from the Central Coast of California. Now she's a Seattle-based sous chef from Manilyn. She's a creator of a local recipe series called The Cookbook. And today we're going to talk about what happened during the pandemic and how this cookbook evolved. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm really excited to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit, take us back in your life to kind of the beginning. Did you have an early connection to food or a special dish or memory?
I think that my beginnings in food were pretty standard for a middle-class Californian family. I grew up with a father that worked nights, and I had 3 siblings. My mom was the one who was left to do a lot of the family cooking for us. She wasn't the most creative cook. Hi, Mom, if you're listening out there. But so, and under her, we ate a lot of spaghetti and meatballs, taco night, that kind of very utilitarian style of feeding a crowd on the cheap. So it didn't really dawn on me until later in my life when my dad retired from his, night job, that he was able to be home during dinner time. And I didn't really realize before then that he is an incredible cook and he's very creative and he likes to try new things. Grew up in a kind of family where we had dinner at 6 p.m. on the dot, on the table every single night. I was expected to be there without exception. So I always had a family dinner at home with my mom and my dad and my siblings. So they always instilled in us this kind of like community driven, like we are here, we're going to break bread together, have a family dinner, talk about our day, kind of, come together as a family and do this thing. But it wasn't until my dad started cooking and he would sit down and after trying whatever it is that he had made for the night would start kind of like nitpicking and saying like, oh, I would do this differently. Or if I was going to do this again, I would do such and such. So that's when I started to realize that food could be nuanced and improved upon and tweaked, and you could play with it. And I think that that's where my interest in food started, was listening to my dad critique his own dishes and realizing that there's room for growth with cooking. And I think that that's where it all began.
It's funny. I think about it and I think back now talking about this. We ate dinner at 6:30 on the dot and it was the family meal and everybody was there. And I lived on a lake when I was young and my dad used to get really upset because I would go fishing and it would be so hard to pull me from the lake at dinner time. I'd always make it back by 6:30, What age were you, if you can remember, where you really got excited about cooking and you really started to think about playing with your food, if you will?
I think maybe about 16,
Okay.
17. That's kind of the age where I was, left at home alone more often and going through the fridge and kind of just having to see like, all right, what do I have in here? And honestly, like watching a lot of Food Network shows at the time
Uh-huh.
was a
Sure.
big draw for me of like seeing these like those silly kind of cheesy chopped and like Iron Chef type shows, people being like incredibly creative. And I kind of, that really appealed to me. Senior year of high school, around that like 17, 18-year-old age, I took one of those like home ec cooking classes. I think that's when I just really latched onto it as a form of creative expression, I suppose. It became really interesting to me after that point because I could make something out of nothing, and that really stuck with me.
When would you say did you get the chef bug where you felt like, I really want to go in this direction. I want to learn more about food. A lot of us get pulled into the restaurant business, and I remember that experience. And how did that happen for you?
It's definitely a draw. I think that it's a draw for a lot of people. And I definitely think that happened to me after that culinary or that cooking class I took while I was in high school. I was like, oh, this is cool. I want to learn more about that. I remember having the conversation with my parents of telling them like, I want to go to culinary school. I want to explore this world, and then telling me, no, we want you to go the more traditional route, academia, or going to college, like that's what we've always planned for you. And I think that I just sort of like fell in line and went that route for a little while. I took a couple years worth of courses at a community college. It didn't feel right to me. And ever since I was old enough to have a job, I've worked in restaurants. Granted, they were like
Oh,
sandwich shop, mom and pop cafes and like that type
mm-hmm.
of thing. But like I've been in the restaurant or hospitality industry since I was 16 years old.
Okay.
And I remember my older brother who, had gone through like working in pizza shops and ice cream parlors and that kind of thing, telling me like, you're going to hate it. This is the last food industry job you'll ever have. It's the worst. And joke's on him. It's been a long time and I'm still doing it. So I think that it was just kind of like a natural progression for me.
And you talk about schooling and briefly talked about this, but did you actually go to cooking school? Did you attend any kind of formal cooking classes?
I did end up there, I guess.
Okay.
So in sort of a roundabout way. I went to the community college in my hometown, San Luis Obispo, after graduating from Rio Grande High School, just kind of decided that was like where I should go, and took a couple years worth of classes, and then finally just decided like I'm wasting my time and I'm wasting my money here on something that I don't necessarily feel passionate about. And
Right.
I felt this draw to do something else. So I kind of just made this decision to pack everything I owned and drive up the coast and move my life to Seattle and attend Seattle Culinary Academy when I turned like about 22. So around 8 years ago now.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Where's that located? Because I went to South Seattle Community College. It was a really good cooking school.
Yes, they're sister schools.
Okay.
The Seattle Culinary Academy is inside Seattle Central, which is on Capitol Hill, like right on Broadway, like in the heart of Capitol Hill.
Okay. And just for our listeners around the world, we're talking about Seattle, Washington, which is on the west coast of the U.S. It's also known as the Pacific Northwest. So just want to give a reference point there.
Totally.
Because we have listeners all over the world.
Right, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I've connected with a bunch of them, and it's great to share these stories and these messages around the world. Can you take us through your culinary journey after cooking school? What happened then?
My culinary journey essentially started while I was in culinary school. I'd only made it through a couple quarters, and I decided I wanted to get a job in a restaurant. I think I was working as a barista at the time, and finally decided like, all right, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. So my third quarter of culinary school, one of my chef at the time, my chef instructor, I should say, um, heard of a job opening and recommended it to me. I guess he, thought I had something. So
Great.
I took a stage, which is what we consider in like the culinary community kind of like a trial shift.
Hmm.
You go in for, the day or so, and you bring your knives and you kind of like fake work in this restaurant to show them your chops, and you might get it, you might not. I ended up landing that job.
That's great.
That was at a restaurant. Yeah, it was awesome. I was mighty proud of myself at that time.
You should be.
Yeah, I was at a restaurant called Tilth here in Seattle. They're now defunct, which was a huge loss during the pandemic. They ended up closing down, which was painful because that was the restaurant where I definitely like cut my teeth in the like finer dining style of cooking, and was the first time that I really was cooking on that level. And I learned a lot and I failed a lot, but it was an incredible experience for me. So while I was in culinary school, I was also working at this, at the time, like very demanding restaurant for me. So I can't remember being so tired ever before in my life.
Yeah.
It was exhausting, but that was a start. And after graduating culinary school, I moved on to a restaurant here in Seattle called Lark. I spent some time there. And then, ever since then, I've just kind of moved on from nice restaurant to nice restaurant, working with and for some really talented people and learning a lot along the way. Worked for Renee Erickson at Bar Melazine, just like have worked in some pretty rad restaurants that I'm very proud to have on my resume. I've definitely learned a lot over the past couple of years and honed a lot of skills, and definitely come a long way, making sandwiches when I was 16. So it's been a pretty cool trajectory for sure.
Yeah. What would you say is your most memorable place that you've worked out of the whole journey?
Oh, that's so fun. That's a fun question. There have been an awful lot of really memorable places. I think that the memorability of these places boils down to the people that I spent time with during that time than like the actual restaurant itself.
Yeah.
I've met so many incredible people along the way and fostered so many relationships. A lot of the times when you're in the hospitality industry and you're working in restaurants, you form these tight bonds with people. That's usually based on proximity, right? You see these people every single day, you work long shifts with them.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you end up not working for that restaurant anymore, that relationship kind of falls out.
Sarah, it's also what you go through.
Right.
In the restaurant business, you work these long hours and you survive that dinner rush. It's hard to explain unless you've been through it. It's almost like you're in a war zone sometimes. You're so bonded to people in the restaurant business, and you form these really tight relationships, and it's really special.
It is, yes, it is very special. It's a huge bonding experience. I would say maybe my time at Lark was the most memorable because of the people that I was with at the time.
Okay.
The people that I was working with at that restaurant have gone on to do some incredible things.
That's awesome.
Right. Mitch Mayer, who was the CDC while I was there, went on to open Sawyer and Ballard, and Ben Campbell, who is an incredible baker, is now opening his own brick and mortar baking bread, and David Gurowitz, who opened up Ladiv on Capitol Hill, which is an incredible natural wine bar. Like everybody kind of like branched out and did these just like really inspiring projects. And it was cool to know that I was there at this like boiling point time of like everybody kind of branched off and did these awesome things. And you're really, really proud to come from that background and know these people, I suppose.
I've heard about a lot of these restaurants, and I need to visit some of them now, as we wind down with the pandemic, because we believe it's going to end.
Right.
If I don't visit a restaurant, I get takeout to support local restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
Always. Brian will tell you, oh, well, let's talk about Brian. So you talk about amazing people in the restaurant business. How did you meet Brian?
Brian O'Neill was a very chance encounter, I guess you could say.
Uh-huh.
I was planning to get lunch with my friend Austin And she was, for whatever reason, really craving like a crab roll.
Mm.
Like it just had like stuck in her mind that like that's what it was that she wanted for lunch. We planned to go to Ray's Cafe, which is where her now fiance works, to go get one that they had on special. They ended up selling out before we could get there for lunch, so we had to pivot. But she was like dead set on eating this particular sandwich, I suppose. And we, went on the old internet and searched around to see who in the city was serving a similar thing, and it happened to be Bar Harbor.
Yes.
In South Lake Union. We kind of just wandered into the bar that day. Brian was working, and I don't know, we all just hit it off, and the rest is history. He's an incredibly interesting human. We just kind of formed a friendship.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun. I really enjoy him. I work in the building, and
right.
I come down after work. I was just thinking about this the other day. I was there on Thursday at work in downtown Seattle, and Bar Harbor is such a great seafood restaurant because they import lobster from Maine, and the owner actually has a connection, I think, to the fishmongers and the fishermen in Maine. He has a direct connection. So it's really fresh. And I swear I walked out of the elevator coming down from work, and this guy was carrying a lobster roll, and I just about died because I was so hungry and I had to rush, out of the building. Literally, because I knew if I didn't, I would circle back in and order one. But my wife and I already had dinner, she was making dinner. So, but it's like so torturous sometimes working in that building. And Brian laughs at me sometimes because I crave their food. I mean, I just crave it because it's so good and so fresh. I was so curious how I met him. Yeah, that's really cool. Let's move forward a little bit and let's talk about what happened. Everyone has a different story. Believe it or not, I started this podcast because I woke up one day at the beginning of the pandemic and I realized that chefs needed a voice. And that's the whole reason that Voice4Chefs was created. But you have a different story. I know that at the beginning of the pandemic, you got laid off. It was out of your control and you didn't do anything wrong. It's just the pandemic, right?
Sure.
When that happened, can you kind of take us through what happened during that time and what led you to launching this amazing series of cookbooks?
Yeah, right when we were starting to hear these like inklings of COVID and, right when it was popping up in the news and nobody quite knew like what was going on. And everybody kind of had that feeling of like, oh, it's not going to come over here. That's like an over there sort of problem and we'll be okay. Like in our beginning naive mindset that this wasn't going to become a global issue.
Yeah.
I was working at this butcher shop / restaurant up in like Lake City, Maple Leaf kind of area.
Okay.
I had only been there for a couple months. I had just left my job with Sea Creatures and was hoping to learn a little bit more about nose to tail butchery, hoping to expand my knowledge a little bit in that regard. And so I took this job at this butcher shop.
Cool.
Ended up doing brunch with them and I was fucking miserable. I'm not sure if we're allowed to curse.
You can.
Yeah.
This is the restaurant business. So
perfect. That's it's going to come out of me at some point.
It has to because it's who you are. So don't apologize.
Perfect. I was fucking miserable.
Yep.
Hated the job, but I'd already left a pretty good job to move over to this one where I thought I was going to learn something that I clearly wasn't going to. It was just the switch was not panning out the way that I had hoped.
Yeah.
And so we are hearing these inklings of COVID, coronavirus, all of these things, not really thinking that it's going to reach us. And then it did. As we all know, it did back in March of 2020 when Jay Inslee, the governor here in Seattle, if you weren't aware, well, for listeners, announced that all restaurants were shutting down effective immediately.
Right.
Every single person that I know in my life lost their job overnight.
Yeah.
Which is an incredibly interesting experience because like when you are entrenched in the restaurant industry,
it's not like you don't have enough shit to deal with being in the restaurant business.
Exactly. And then all
I
of a
think
sudden,
about it. People aren't aware how hard this business is. Oh my God.
they're not.
Yeah.
It's incredibly difficult.
Mm,
And, all of a sudden, every single person that I knew was without a job, myself
yeah.
included. And
Yeah.
it was just like this really weird limbo time. I remember, so all the restaurants got shut down effective midnight on like whatever March day that was, right? So I live right down the street from a Big Mario's, which is like a pizza bar joint, and it's like a pretty well known like industry hangout.
Okay.
And so because the shutdown was going into effect at midnight that night, per the announcement from the local government, I think every single person I knew showed up at that bar, just like trying to get the last of it in before we were all locked down and quarantined for the next however long,
Yeah.
And the government had said, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. We're just going to do this for the next 2 weeks. And I remember all these people that I'm surrounded with, line cooks, servers, bartenders, what have you, all saying, how am I going to survive
Right.
financially for the next 2 weeks? That was our concern at the time, was like 2 weeks was like a death
God.
sentence for hospitality workers. And that just goes to show you like how paycheck to paycheck these workers live their lives. That 2 weeks was
Right.
like a knife in the chest. Like we had no idea how to move forward. Like sitting at the bar, everybody had their phones out signing up for welfare and
Right.
assistance, just like trying to ensure that we're going to have a paycheck because we weren't going to make rent otherwise.
Yeah, that is just total bullshit.
It was
And
pandemonium.
it's so unreal how low the wages are and how hard people work in the restaurant business. It rips me apart inside. And
Totally.
I left the industry eventually. I loved it just like you. I was so passionate. I wanted to own a restaurant. And then I just felt horrible about it. It just, the hours, oh my God, the hours were just insane. And to add the pandemic to that, I mean, that's just such bullshit. And
Right.
it's so unfair. It's so unfair, and yeah. Anyway.
It was a brutal realization. It was really tough. But then, we kind of all had to do, what we did, and all jobless. We kind of all
Right.
quarantined and all of our restaurants shut down. So what happened was, I I almost felt relieved that I
Yeah.
didn't have to
Yeah.
return to this restaurant that I really was not enjoying my time at. So I was like, okay, well, at least I don't have to go back there.
Mm-hmm.
But then it kind of offered me some time to step away from the industry and sort of reevaluate my relationship with it. And consider the things about the industry that I really did not like. And it was, a couple months of me thinking like, okay, do I really even want to go back there? Like, do I want to put myself back in that situation where I know that it's toxic and the hours are long,
Right.
and you're there for 12-hour days. You don't get paid very much. Like, sexual harassment and low wages, like exploitative, like working environments, like you name it. That stuff was alive and well in the industry before the pandemic. It still is today. Things are
Yeah.
changing and
Yeah.
things are getting better, but it's a tough industry to work in. And after a month or so of just not having a job and just sitting and thinking on it, kind of changed my perspective of how I view this industry. But what happened was all of our restaurants shut down. So what happens with all the food?
Oh God.
And a lot of a lot of people, a lot of cooks especially, were able to go and raid the restaurants that they worked at for the food that was in the walk-ins.
I had no idea.
Right.
Wow.
Because otherwise it's going to rot.
Right.
We can't sell it at the restaurant. It's just going to lay to waste.
Wow.
So I ended up bringing home a ton of food.
Yeah.
And, we had crab cakes and
oh my God,
black cod and, slabs of pork shoulder and sauces and all of these things and caviar and oysters, but I didn't have toilet paper.
Right.
It was kind of crazy. And so I'm at home and I'm cooking all of these things and I'm considering my position in the industry and whether or not I want to go back to it and pinpointing all of the things that I found as negatives, but also thinking about what I missed about it. And the things that I missed most was the sense of community that you got from working in the restaurant industry.
I miss that. I've been out of it for a long time. Yeah, it is incredible.
It is an incredible.
You can't put a price on it.
You can't. Yeah. You can't put a price on the camaraderie. You can't put a price on the sense of community. It's an incredible feeling being involved in something like that. And I was really missing it. You meet all kinds working in the hospitality industry.
Yeah.
I was just kind of missing that a lot and thinking about my cook friends and cooking all of these things at home and sort of just wondering, like, what is everybody else cooking at home? Like, I wonder what everybody else is doing with this time. And so that's kind of how the idea for the original first volume of the cookbook came about.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Was cooking all this food at home from this restaurant that I had to raid so the food wouldn't spoil because all these restaurants are now like empty. There's no people in them, kind of trying to find a way to reconnect with the restaurant community, even though we couldn't be together physically cooking or, with each other. So I sent out a call to my fellow industry folks, and I wanted them to send me handwritten recipes because that's what we do. Yeah, that's what we do in the restaurant industry is we carry around.
I remember, oh my God, I think I lost one of my books. I was so devastated.
It's heartbreaking when you lose one, but we all carry these moleskin notebooks around writing down these recipes and everybody's got one. It almost acts as sort of like a journal for the restaurant that you're working in at the time. Yeah. And I kind of wanted to, metaphorically take a page out of that book and have people send me their handwritten recipes. So I put a call out to my community. Originally, it was supposed to be like a printed at home, stapled together, sort of like very punk, like very DIY sort of thing. But I got so much response that it ended up being an actual printed by a print shop, like for sale cookbook. And the rest, I guess, from there is sort of history.
You don't know what to make for dinner again? You want to explore new cuisines, but you don't have time? What if you have new inspirations and we provide you with the ingredients and recipes? We know you want to travel, learn new foods, explore the world, but life's responsibilities keep getting in your way. What if you can bring those experiences to your home neatly packed into a box? Ladybug Collective is a subscription service that finds real people from around the world to create beautifully curated assortments of recipes, ingredients, and cultural content. Not only do we include cultural ingredients, but also a set of detailed recipe cards with instructions on how to use them. Each box also has a QR code that when scanned takes you to tons more global exploration to immerse yourself in. Everything from film to lifestyle, art to history, it all can be found here. Live your life to the fullest. Subscribe now and don't miss out on the next cultural adventure. Ladybug Collective. Always exploring.
So what was the response like? I mean, your expectations were probably low, I'm guessing.
On the floor, yes. I thought that I, at the most, would receive like 10 recipes.
Okay.
But I think for the first volume, I ended up getting 45,
Wow.
which, that's a fair amount of effort for everybody to put in and pull together. And it was really cool. A lot of word of mouth, people telling other people like, hey, this girl Sarah is doing this like thing, do you want to participate? And
I love it.
totally. And like at the time, nobody else had anything else going on. We were all just like sitting at home. So it sort of worked out as like a perfect storm. Like it was, the zeitgeist was optimal for that sort of thing at the time. It was community building, bringing people together. The highlight was on hospitality workers at the time because we were, considered essential, and everybody's trying to back, hospitality workers and small restaurants and small businesses. So it was kind of like the perfect storm for something like this to be successful.
Yeah. And so as you were going along, were there any challenges that you encountered during the writing, creating, and publishing process?
The recipes came swiftly and pretty easily. So that part of it wasn't all that difficult. I guess the struggle that I received with at least the first volume was that I didn't bank on it being as popular as it was.
Yeah. You sold out. I remember looking at that. I was like, wow.
I didn't think that it would be so popular. And
Yeah.
I launched the release of it for pre-order.
Okay.
Because the units themselves, the books themselves are pretty costly to produce.
Right.
So the only way I would be able to afford it up front was to have people prepay for them.
Okay.
And I wasn't really sure how many of them I was going to sell. And so I launched it for pre-order so that I could, get a better idea. And stupidly, I just posted it on Instagram and I said, DM me if you want one. And all of a sudden my inbox was flooded. The response was swift and immediate and overwhelming. I was definitely in over my head. I hadn't set up like a Squarespace or like anything like that. It was just like very grassroots, like message me if you want one of these things. You can pay me via Venmo, And then it just went absolutely bonkers. And I ended up selling like 300 copies of the first one, I'm pretty sure.
Oh my gosh.
It just kind of like exploded, which was cool. I thought maybe 100, maybe if I'm lucky, but it ended up being an awful lot more than that. It was really humbling, really cool experience to watch all of these messages just pop up in my inbox and everybody be so supportive was really rad.
Yeah. So what about the creating side of it?
Hannah Marie Nelson, local oil painter, and she caught my eye via Instagram during the pandemic. And when I was thinking like, okay, this thing like needs a cover, I was like, I should outsource this because I don't quite know what I'm doing in that regard.
You can't do everything.
Right. And,
I get it. I really
spread the work around a little bit. So I reached out to Hannah because I really enjoyed her artwork and asked her if she would be willing to create a cover for the book, and she did so, and she's incredible, and she's actually she's given us her artwork for all 3 versions of the book. So she's an incredibly talented human. Yes.
Let's give her a shout out. How do people find her?
Totally. Like she makes some of the best focaccia I've ever eaten in my life. So she's just like multi-talented, incredible human. Her Instagram is Hannah, HANNAH_Marie, MARIE.
So you had an artist. My mom's an artist. She's a lighthouse artist, actually. Yeah, she listens to these episodes too. So hi, Mom. I love artists and I love the creativity, and my wife told me I was an artist because of cooking, and I never really thought about it because for me, I can't draw to save my life and my handwriting is atrocious. It's like doctor's handwriting. But food is a whole nother story. I love creating in the canvas in the kitchen, and that is an amazing experience, and it's so creative. And I didn't even think that way until my wife pointed it out to me. I just thought it was what you did.
Totally. And, I mean, personally, I view it as a form of self-expression, and it's putting myself on a plate however it is that I'm feeling that day, I can create something to kind of show that or express myself. I've kind of always thought of it that way, and it's always been a huge creative outlet to me to cook.
So how did the Seattle Times pick this up? What was that like?
There was a journalist by the name of Bethany that works for the Seattle Times. She reached out to me via Instagram also, I believe.
Okay.
And just basically just said like, hey, I'm really interested in this story. I would love to cover this, kind of love to talk to you about this. And so when I was doing volume 2, she was really interested in covering the story for the Seattle Times while volume 2 was happening.
Okay.
So yeah, she reached out to me. We did kind of an over the phone interview because it was still in the throes of COVID, and restaurants were like just starting to open back up, mostly for like takeout services and that kind of thing. She had caught wind of the first version, was interested in the second, and then I guess decided to cover it for the paper. So she contacted me about that. We did a little interview, a little mini like photo shoot, I guess, for the paper at the restaurant I was working at the time. And it went from there, which made huge difference in how many of those books I sold. It was pretty crazy. The morning that the article went live, I woke up and my phone was just like, wouldn't stop buzzing. It was wild.
Wow. In round 2, right?
Round 2, yeah.
So first it was the Instagram blow up, and then it was the phones in round 2.
Yeah, holy shit, you're in the Seattle Times. This is you.
Right.
Like, what? This is crazy.
That's amazing. So were you better prepared for that? Were you braced for it all?
I was better prepared for it that time around because I'd actually made myself like a Squarespace website.
Okay.
So there was actually like a link that people could go to purchase it online instead of me just having to like filter through my DMs and find everybody's information. Like I had a place for people to direct people to purchase one, which made shipping a hell of a lot easier. And,
Right.
I think I ended up selling like 650, like almost 700 copies of that version.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's fantastic.
So it really boosted up the numbers with the visibility from the paper. So that was really cool.
Did you meet any interesting chefs along the way?
I have come into contact with
Okay.
many interesting chefs along the way because the majority of this is done remotely. The first couple too were like very deep in the pandemic. So everybody like either mailed them to me or dropped them off at my house. So I didn't really get to like meet these people in person. And then it wasn't until volume 3 that I actually started to like meet in person these people that I don't actually know that were contributing to this project, which was pretty cool.
Do you want to give any shout outs to anybody that helped you in the project?
There are so many people that have helped me throughout this project that I am endlessly grateful to. Obviously, Hannah for producing her incredible artwork along the way. This past version, volume 3, finally bucked up and had a graphic designer help me out because that's something I know nothing of. So Holly Dirks, she's in Texas now, but she was living in Seattle at the time. She helped with all of the graphic design for volume 3, which was awesome. My buddy Jack, he's an incredible photographer. He shot all of the photographs of contributors and the food for the volume 3 version, which includes, color photography. Shot all of that on film, which ended up beautifully in the book. Everybody that contributed a recipe along the way and took the time to contribute to this project. Like I truly, by its concept, could not have done it without the community. And I think that that's what makes it so special.
Yeah, that's really incredible. I love the collaboration idea. It really intrigued me. So we're going to move forward to one of my favorite parts of the show, and that's Let's Get Cooking. I know in one of your recipe books, I think it's the third one, you have, is it caramel chicken wings?
Oh, yeah. Right? Volume 2, I did these
Oh,
these
volume two.
caramel,
Okay.
these caramel fish sauce chicken wings. Super good. Actually have people, my friend Austin has made
Uh-huh.
them multiple times for gatherings and people request them. And I think that's super cool. So
Yeah, that's a great compliment. How would you describe the taste?
they're kind of these like Vietnamese inspired style of making chicken wings. So you do actually make like a sugar caramel, cook it way down until it's dark and thick, and then you add in fish sauce and a bunch of other spices, and it turns into this like salty, sweet, umami rich, like deep
Mm,
flavored glaze for chicken wings, and you just toss some fried breaded wings in them, and it's like a perfect snack. They're crunchy and textural and sweet, salty, funky, like all over the map flavors, and they come together really deliciously.
yeah, once we get back together, that sounds like a great potluck item
Exactly. Yeah, totally.
for gatherings. Wow. Any other recipes you want to call out? I know it's hard to call out one, and people ask me about episodes. I love every single one of them, but there are a few that really stand out. So is there any other recipes you can tell us about with Cookbook 3?
I think one of my favorite recipes in the Cookbook Volume 3 is Sarah Upshaw's radish kimchi.
Oh,
But she just makes some incredible kimchi, and she allowed us to have her radish kimchi available in the Cookbook Volume 3, and it's just incredible. So I think that is definitely one of my favorites.
I know you had a really interesting launch party before where you were cooking some of the recipes out of the cookbook. Can you describe that, like what the launch party was like?
It was such a fun day. I invited a handful of the contributors from the cookbook to participate in sort of like a maker's market, I guess you could call it. So I am lucky with my restaurant that I am the sous chef at. They have a pretty large courtyard. And I asked them if I could hold this event for the cookbook, and they said totally. So I allowed a bunch of the contributors to the cookbook to essentially set up shop in the courtyard, right? Selling their like pre-made, pre-packaged versions of their recipes or the things that they had in the book. So people could come and, pick up their copy or buy copies of the cookbooks. We had like shots and beers and a cocktail, and you could walk around and just kind of like meet and greet some of the people that are featured in the Cookbook Volume 3 and like buy their recipes. And so it was a really rad community driven event where, everybody came together and in support of this like cool community cookbook. And you actually got to meet a handful of the people that participated and talk to them about their recipes and what it is that they're doing. So that was a really, really fun event to culminate this release.
That sounds amazing. I mean, that just sounds like such a great way to spread the word and connect community. I was envisioning it. I'm going, that's super cool. I mean, I've been to book signings, right? But it's a different kind of thing when you're connecting with food, and the food is a huge part of that, right? And the people that create it, and you're honoring them at the same time. I just love it. I just absolutely love it.
It's all about community, man. And food is that way, and it brings people together. And that's my favorite part about it. So I definitely meant for this project as a whole and all of the, events that came with it to be a community based project. So I'm really happy that came across.
So in your culinary journey, can you tell us, are there any chefs that you admire when you look out, in that span now with social media? It's so easy to connect to so many chefs in the world, but are there any specific ones either in Seattle or around the world that you really respect and you really admire?
I think that my answer for this is going to be pretty broad, actually. I'm sure that's not what you're looking for, but
it's okay.
Over the course of the pandemic, what I thought has been the coolest thing to come out of such an incredibly tough time for a lot of people was this boom of pop-ups throughout the city. I don't think that really wasn't something that was going on before the pandemic happened. You know, we're in Seattle, and it was really cool during the pandemic to see people kind of pop up in these like empty kitchens that weren't being used, and line cooks who otherwise weren't big name chefs or working at big name restaurants, just people with a passion for food who just wanted to put their passion out into the world. And I think it's been a really rad thing for the Seattle restaurant industry specifically to have all of these line cooks come up and be like, no, I love making this thing, and I want to show you like how good and cool this can be. And I think that has been my favorite thing.
You made me think of something. So when I first launched the Voice4Chefs podcast, it was last year, and kind of in the middle of the year, I interviewed a chef. Her name is Sabrina Tinsley, and she has a restaurant with her husband, Pietro Borghese, called La Spiga. It's a really incredible Italian restaurant. But what they do is they really connect to community because they host pop-ups for other chefs to come to their restaurant, and they honor them. And it's just, I just love the idea. And they always, they market them, they help them grow. And you just made me think of that. It's like this community connection that's so powerful.
Totally. And lifting each other up and giving other cooks in this city a chance to shine and show what they can do. And I think that that's what it's all about.
So last couple questions. Do you have any special message that you want to share with the world? Is there any kind of takeaways from this incredible idea that you had of creating this community cookbook?
I mean, it's been a huge learning experience over the past couple years. And I guess my biggest personal takeaway from this experience is just like, you never know, I guess, what's going to happen. And curveballs come at you left and right. And I think that if anything else, like this has taught me to just like roll with what comes to you and don't be afraid to fail. I had no idea that this was going to be as successful as it was. And I'm so happy that I pushed through that anxiety and I pushed through that fear, because if I let that take over, I never would have gone through with it. And I'm so glad that I did. And I'm so glad that I had this idea in my head that just kept scratching at the back of my brain until I finally pulled the trigger and said, all right, I'm going to do it. And if I fail, then that's okay. And we just keep rolling. But I'm so happy that I took the leap. And I think that throughout the rest of my life, that's a lesson that I've learned from this experience for sure.
That's really amazing, Sarah, what you've accomplished and the people's lives that you've changed and inspired, to have their recipes in a cookbook in such a hard time, to lift them up. I think that is really a gift. How do we connect with you, and how do we purchase these cookbooks?
You can still purchase Volume 2 and Volume 3. My Instagram is the best way to reach out to me. It's my first initial and my last name. So ssmonsonn, Monson. And there is a link in my Instagram bio to take you to my Squarespace site to purchase Volumes 2 and 3. They're available for shipping, so it makes it super easy. They'll come straight to your door, straight from my living room.
And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. You are truly a voice for chefs, and I'm really honored to meet you and have a chance to have this conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate your taking the time. It's been really fun.
Thanks for joining us today. Follow us on Facebook. Find our website in the show notes. Subscribe on Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen. Leave a comment with 5 stars, and stay tuned for the next episode of Voice for Chefs. Thanks for joining us today. Follow us on Facebook. Find our website in the show notes. Subscribe on Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen. leave a comment with 5 stars, and stay tuned for the next episode of Voice for Chefs.